In 2006, the world's most powerful space agency watched a private rocket blow up 30 seconds after launch. They laughed. NASA had been flying rockets since before most of the SpaceX engineers were born. They had the Saturn V, the most powerful machine ever built by human hands. They had the shuttle program. They had 16,000 engineers, a government budget, and 6 decades of institutional knowledge. SpaceX had a warehouse in El Segundo, California, about 80 employees, and a guy who had made his money selling an online payments company to eBay. That was 2006. By 2020, that same guy's rocket was carrying NASA astronauts to the International Space Station because NASA no longer had anything capable of doing it themselves. This is how it happened. Elon Musk sold PayPal to eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion. His personal cut was around $180 million. Most people in that position buy a yacht. Musk started reading about rocket engines. His original idea wasn't even a rocket company. He wanted to put a small greenhouse on Mars, a pressurized dome with plants inside, live-streamed back to Earth. A publicity stunt to reignite public interest in space exploration and push Congress to give NASA more money. He called it the Mars Oasis. So he flew to Russia, twice, trying to buy decommissioned intercontinental ballistic missiles to use as cheap launch vehicles. The Russians quoted him $8 million per rocket and didn't take him seriously. During one meeting, a Russian engineer reportedly spat on the floor in front of him. On the flight home, Musk opened a spreadsheet and started calculating what it would actually cost to build a rocket from scratch. The numbers were lower than expected, significantly lower, and that changed everything. He got home. He called Tom Mueller. Mueller was an aerospace engineer from St. Mary's, Idaho, a small logging town. His father was a logger and expected his son to be one too. Mueller had other plans. As a kid, he built model rockets. As a teenager, he experimented with his father's welding equipment to try to make his own engines. He ended up at TRW, one of the big aerospace contractors in Los Angeles, designing rocket engines for a living. But TRW never gave him the kind of work he actually wanted to do. So at nights and on weekends, in a rented warehouse with an amateur rocket club, Mueller was quietly building what would become the largest liquid-fueled amateur rocket engine ever made. 13,000 pounds of thrust, designed and built by a guy who just couldn't stop himself. That's where Musk found him, through the rocket club. He had one question: can you build something bigger? Mueller said yes. In May 2002, Space Exploration Technologies Corporation was founded, SpaceX. They set up in a small 3,000 square foot warehouse. Mueller was employee number 1. Chris Thompson was number 2. Within a few months, Gwynne Shotwell, a mechanical engineer from Northwestern who had spent a decade in aerospace, joined to run business development. She was so good that Musk kept giving her bigger and bigger jobs until she was effectively running the whole company. The goal was clear. Everyone else was building rockets the way they'd always been built. Expensive, disposable, built by enormous defense contractors with bloated government contracts and no incentive to cut costs. A launch on a ULA Atlas V rocket cost upwards of $160 million. Each rocket was used once, then dropped into the ocean. SpaceX wanted to change both of those things at once. Here's where things get interesting. To prove the concept, they needed to launch a small rocket to orbit. They called it Falcon 1. They assembled it on a tiny island in the Marshall Islands in the Pacific, a remote military test site called Omelek, barely bigger than the launch pad itself. There was one boat in and out per day. Engineers slept on cots. Parts were sometimes flown in on Musk's private jet. March 24th, 2006, the first launch. 30 seconds after liftoff, a fuel line corroded by a rusted nut caught fire. The rocket tumbled and was lost. March 2007, second attempt. The rocket reached higher than ever before, but failed to reach orbit when the stages failed to separate cleanly. August 2008, third attempt. The first stage performed perfectly. Mueller's engine worked exactly as designed, but when the stages separated, residual thrust from the first stage bumped into the second, and both were lost. On board that third rocket were the remains of 208 people, including astronaut Gordon Cooper and actor James Doohan, Scotty from Star Trek, who had requested their ashes be scattered in space. They were not. By this point, SpaceX was nearly out of money. Musk had invested most of his PayPal fortune into the company. Tesla, which he was also funding, was simultaneously on the verge of collapse. He was reportedly waking from nightmares, screaming in the night from the stress. The team built the fourth rocket in 6 weeks. They used every available part. They shipped it on a chartered cargo jet, and during the flight, the cabin pressure differential partially imploded the rocket's body. Engineers had to make emergency repairs on a military island in the Pacific Ocean to get it launch-worthy again. September 28, 2008. The countdown ran, the Merlin engine lit, and for 9 minutes and 31 seconds, Falcon 1 climbed through the atmosphere, separated cleanly, and reached orbit. Mueller watched from the launch control room. He had spent 38 years dreaming about building rockets. He'd done it in a rented warehouse on weekends because nobody would give him the chance to do it properly. He had just designed and built the engine of the first privately funded, liquid-fueled rocket in history to reach orbit. The control room erupted. Musk walked out in front of the cameras and said, "That was the fourth attempt. That was the last money that we had. Fate liked us that day." 3 months later, NASA handed SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract to resupply the International Space Station. The company that had been days away from bankruptcy was suddenly the future of American spaceflight. What came next is almost hard to believe if you didn't watch it happen. SpaceX took the lessons from Falcon 1 and built Falcon 9, a larger 9-engine rocket designed from the start to be reused. Not thrown away, not dropped in the ocean, landed vertically on a drone ship in the middle of the Atlantic. Everyone in the industry said it couldn't be done. You couldn't land a used booster. The aerodynamics were wrong. The engineering was impossible. The economics didn't justify it. On December 21st, 2015, a Falcon 9 first stage returned from orbit and landed itself, upright on 4 legs at Cape Canaveral, while the crowd at Mission Control lost their minds. The cost of a Falcon 9 launch, around $67 million. The cost of a ULA Atlas V, up to $160 million. NASA's own Space Launch System, over $2 billion per flight. SpaceX wasn't just cheaper, it was launching more rockets than any country on Earth. By 2018, it had outpaced Russia. By 2023, it was responsible for more than half of all global launches. A company that had started with 80 people in a warehouse was now eclipsing the space programs of nation-states. And in May 2020, a SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule lifted off from launchpad 39A at Kennedy Space Center, the same pad that launched Apollo 11 to the moon, carrying 2 NASA astronauts to the International Space Station. For the first time since the Space Shuttle retired in 2011, America could get its own people to space again. Not with a government rocket, not with a fleet of NASA engineers and a congressional budget, with a private company that had started in a warehouse, nearly gone bankrupt 4 times in 1 year, and built their first successful rocket engine in a borrowed garage. Tom Mueller had asked his father to be a logger. His father wanted him to be a logger. He built a rocket engine instead, and one day, it carried human beings to space.